The most important role of a principal is to be a teacher of teachers. Is to feed the capacity and the skill level of the teachers who actually do the real work of educating children. I was blessed. I was named the Michigan Middle School Principal of the Year in 2005. And I gave all the credit to my staff because I didn't teach one math lesson. Student achievement went up, but I was indirectly responsible. So my investment in them brought about a return in our students. So I would advise a new principal to not walk around trying to be Superman or Superwoman. Is to figure out how you can empower people and how you can build their capacity, and then you build leaders, and then they will educate students who we can be proud of. Well, I think the first thing a new principal would have to realize is that when he or she's dealing with a staff, that they're not coming into an homogenous environment. That people are going to come from different perspectives. People have different backgrounds, different norms, different values, different beliefs. And it's difficult to try and synthesize all of that into one functional way of thinking and behaving. So did a study of 34 schools across the United States to see how school cultures affect people's behavior. We found 4 primary political groups, for lack of a better term. The first group we call the believers. And the believers are those educators who understood the call to duty and understood that improvement had to take place. And they put the student's best interest first. They were willing to go through some personal discomfort, some letting go of some of the things that they've traditionally believed or done or practiced in order to do something that's potentially better for students. So to make a long story short about believers, they put the student's best interests before their own. Second group we found we call the tweeners. The tweeners are the new educators to our campus. And when the new people come, they don't know what the culture is like. It's kind of a honeymoon period. And they're loosely coupled in the beginning. They're not very political. They try and find their spot. But they're very influential. They can be influenced very easily. And what we found is that a campus's ability to hold on, to develop and nurture their tweeners was directly tied in to the future of their school. That schools that had toxic cultures were those who had the highest turnover among this group because they don't build what we call organizational memory. The data shows us nationally that 50% of new educators leave our field the first 5 years. So if half the workforce is walking out, your experience is walking out, all of your teamwork, all of the investment that's been placed in these people, and when new people come in, that school, that team, that department starting all over again. So schools who had a high number of tweeners were kind of like mice in a treadmill. They were just spinning their wheels because they couldn't keep a team together long enough to make the long-term improvement that the school needed. Third group we call the survivors. And the survivors are those educators who have been adversely affected from not having the capacity to deal with our environment. Our environment can be very stressful at times. There's a lot of demands. And survivors are those who've reached the point of burnout. And burnout has been identified in the literature as being a form of depression. So these aren't people that don't want to do any better, but they've reached a point where they're absolutely ineffective and they no longer at that particular moment have the ability to be effective unless an intervention is done. The only thing we found that worked with them was if there was some sort of removal for treatment purposes like you would do for a physical ailment, because they weren't going to get any better on their own. And the real victim of a survivor is a student, because the research shows that a student who has a burned out teacher for a year, it takes 3 years of exemplary make-up instruction to make up for 1 year of non-instruction. So the fourth group is a group that has caused quite a bit of turmoil as we look at school reform as a fundamentalist. And a fundamentalist is an educator who's found a certain comfort zone and found some solace in status quo. They have some investment in keeping things the same. So a fundamentalist is nothing like a survivor. This isn't a person that doesn't like what they do, but they like it under the conditions that are best for them. So to make a long story short, a fundamentalist is a person who puts his or her best interest above the best interest of the student. What we found is that we all walk in as tweeners, but over time, based upon the conditions that we inherit, we can end up being a believer, a fundamentalist, or a survivor. So nobody walks into the organization with the intention to be a fundamentalist. But based upon the leadership that they inherit, how they were socialized as a tweener, how they were mentored, could really determine how they end up practicing for the rest of their career. So fundamentalists, we're not saying are bad people. They're people who've taken a political stance that's not productive as it pertains to what the organization, the school, or the district is trying to do. Dealing with human beings is a very complicated process, and it's hard to break it down, but I'll give you a couple of themes. There were 3 high leverage behaviors that helped transform culture. The first was an institutional focus on learning. When the institution said that learning came first, and it was articulated through their policies, practices, and procedures and organizational expectations, it did a lot to keep people focused on the right things rather than on things that were selfish or self-serving. The second area was institutional celebration of desired behavior. We found when organizations celebrated the behavior that they wanted, instead of spending all their time condemning the behavior that they didn't want, the cultures tended to become more healthy. And last but not least is a focus on a support system for tweeners. When schools got serious about retaining and developing their new teachers, it made a tremendous difference. The NEA has come out against the one-on-one teaching mentor system, and two of the 34 schools in our study use the NEA model of a multifaceted approach to teacher mentoring. They had a team of mentors who had specific areas of proficiency. So they take the person in the school who was best in classroom management, and she would mentor all the new teachers on classroom management. They take the person on the team who was in the school who was best in organizational skills and lesson planning, and they would mentor all the new teachers on organizational skills and lesson planning. So the tweener had a committee or a team of proficient master teachers to guide them in areas of practice, rather than depending on a one-on-one mentor who may or may not be present, and if they are present, their presence may or may not be healthy. So those are the 3 high leverage areas that we found that if schools took those 3 areas seriously, they could make a lot of progress. I would like to say about professional learning community is that because the initiative has become so popular, we're in a phase right now where we have to do a lot of quality control. The effective schools movement and other movements have started, but when people grab hold of something, they put their own spin to it, and it's like a recipe. If my mother makes some good cookies and you want the cookies to taste like her cookies, you can't leave ingredients out. You can't add something that's not supposed to be there. So we've seen this recipe kind of get regional and local flavor to it, and then people say, well, this doesn't look like the cookies that I got. Well, you didn't follow the directions. So what I'm doing today is really helping to solidify with the interns what a real PLC is. From having direct access to the architect, Dr. Rick DeFore, and Dr. Bob Aker, and building a PLC myself. Professional learning community is not a meeting that takes place once a week to talk about God knows what. It's an entire school reform initiative that is very in-depth and is very comprehensive. And if people think that PLCs are simply the department sitting down looking at some data every once in a while, that's one component of the total concept. And what I'm striving to do with the interns today is to really focus on what does the whole package look like.